Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webinar, Balancing Consumer Perspectives and Environmental Responsibility in the Adoption of Sustainable Products. My name is Jason Partridge. I'm the VP of Client Experience here at Lux Research, and I'm lucky enough to be moderating today's session. Presenting today is my colleague, Cheryl Auger. She's the Senior Director of Research, Predictive Anthropology here at Lux Research. As we go through the webinar, please feel free to type any of the questions that you have into the box on your screen. And time permitting, we're going to try and get to each and every single one of those questions if we can. But please don't worry if a question does not get answered. You can reach out directly to us at questions@luxresearchinc.com. That's questions@luxresearchinc.com, and we will be sure to respond to you. And I have a feeling that if you ask a question and we don't get to it, we may even reach out to you. So we're really excited to walk you through this presentation. Cheryl, I'm going to hand the microphone over to you, and thank you everyone for attending today. It's a very, very exciting topic.
Great. Thank you so much, Jason. And thanks everyone for joining us today. I'm looking forward to talking to you all about how to balance consumer perspective along with environmental responsibility when it comes to the adoption of sustainable products and sustainable alternatives. And I'm actually going to start with a bit of an anecdote, which I don't think will be surprising to those of you who have heard some of my webinars or presentations before, but it is an anecdote about my family, in fact. And my stepfather, a number of years ago, purchased a Tesla. And he was really excited because he's the kind of person who, despite his age, just wants to show everyone that he is absolutely keeping up with new technology. He's not going to be left behind. He was pumped. He could be more sustainable while also saving money on his gas bill. Well, lo and behold, my mom tries driving the Tesla, and my mom really dislikes regenerative braking. In fact, she believes that it's like teaching an old dog new tricks. Those are her words, not mine. But she felt like it required her to relearn how to drive, and she was just not having any of it. She would say, you know, I don't give a hoot about keeping up. I'm older now, and I deserve to do my own thing and feel comfortable. So fast forward a few years, and my stepfather decides that, well, he's not willing to give up his EV. He loves it. He's going to trade it in so that he can have a model that allows to switch from regenerative braking to traditional braking in the hopes that my mom will be more inclined to drive the EV, save some money on gas, feel more confident in her driving ability. Now, I won't mention the new model that he purchased, but he had the car for less than 3 months. And while he was driving on one of the side streets in the suburbs where the speed limit is low and there wasn't a lot of traffic, his car just stopped dead in its tracks. Now, of course, this is anecdotal, but it does link back to some of the bigger concerns that we see consumers have when it comes to balancing new technology and innovation with assumptions of risk. And so because the battery died without any kind of warning in the middle of the street, my mom is now convinced that she does not want to be an early adopter. She wants to wait until there's a proven track record and there's more reliability when it comes to battery life. And again, it is absolutely an anecdote, but it does speak to some of the broader concerns that consumers have when it comes to EVs. They worry about charging infrastructure, which is a concern about reliability. Can they reliably travel long distances without worry? Furthermore, we do see consumers worry about the battery technology's maturity. They see the battery as a metaphor for the reliability of an EV, right? And all of this is to say that when it comes to the adoption of new products, new services, things that are sustainable alternatives, well, sustainability is just one driver, but it's not enough for consumers. And that pun was totally intended. But nonetheless, that is just one aspect for consumers, and it is not enough. Consumers have other expectations. In this example, while sustainability is great, they also want a reliable vehicle that will safely take them from point A to point B. So this gets to the central thesis or argument of my talk today, which is that, just creating innovative materials and technologies, well, it's exciting, it's novel, it's cool, but it's just not sufficient on its own to fully drive consumer adoption, particularly among a mainstream or average audience like my mom. Instead, to succeed, we need to increase the attractiveness of these new materials and these new technologies to consumers. We need to figure out, what are the expectations that consumers have? How do we deliver against those expectations in order to assure both our financial success? We want to launch successful products, but also to make sustainable products more appealing to consumers and thus have an impact on the broader world around us. So in addition to considering the environmental impact of services, technologies, products, materials, what have you, we also need to assure that we're meeting consumer expectations to thrive in the marketplace. So I'm going to take you through 2 examples today. One is an example of a very, very new technology that is not fully commercialized, and the other is a more developed technology, and we'll see how consumers are approaching drive consumer adoption of these products. So first, let's take a look at, this is a very novel technology, taking carbon out of the air and using it as an input in plastic. It just sounds so futuristic and really interesting. But at the same time, as we'll see in my next slide, it's not something that most people are aware of. So what I've done here is I've put a screenshot of our technology, our maturity curve. And our maturity curve allows us to see how many people are engaged and interested in a topic, and then also how mature is it in culture. And by cultural maturity, we're looking at how much consensus there is in the meanings that consumers associate with this technology. Now, this one's really interesting because we're way in that new idea stage, which of course makes sense given that this technology is still experimental. And I know a number of corporations are working through ways to commercialize it, a lot in the packaging space. I know there's a German company that at one point was making a mattress, but there are some struggles in getting consumers to adopt this technology. And that's largely because I think we need to really understand consumer expectations here. So consumers do believe that carbon dioxide plastics, could have an impact on sustainability, but they believe that they're most sustainable when used in products and applications that have a long lifespan. So this is because consumers believe that long-lasting plastic products generate less waste. Less waste goes into the landfill, and therefore they are more sustainable. So again, I just want to note that when we're in this early stage of cultural maturity, we often see a very engaged, very technical and savvy consumer who is a little bit more knowledgeable about the science behind these, as well as what it means to them. They may also be willing to make some sacrifices. But nonetheless, when we take a closer look at consumer expectations, we do see that they have both functional and sustainability requirements that they're not totally sure are being met. So top of mind for consumers, even those consumers committed to being more sustainable, is functional and durable plastics. As I mentioned, this is in part, and as we're going to talk about, because they believe that reducing waste is a key part of sustainability. And the more durable the plastic is, the less likely they have to replace it, or they replace it less often. So again, if we think about this from the consumer perspective, we start to realize that plastic is everywhere. It's ubiquitous. It's a huge part of our life in North America. It's in everything from our coffee carafe, of course, to those ubiquitous food storage containers. So as we think about the way that consumers use and engage with plastic, it's not so surprising that they're looking for something durable. They're looking for something that is long lasting. And furthermore, they're looking for plastics that can withstand harsh temperatures. They want to take those food storage containers from the fridge, pop them in the microwave, assuming they're BPA free, and then put them back in the freezer. They want them to withstand all these different temperatures, but working without distorting. They want them to last longer. And notably, they believe that there is potential for these better, more functional food storage containers to produce or lead to less food waste in the home, which is another sustainability consideration for consumers. So, not a surprise, consumers want a functional practice as plastic, that's long lasting, but they're also worried about, and I've hinted at this quite a few times, about the end of life management. They are thinking about these products throughout the supply chain, and they are worried that plastics, whether it's based traditional plastic, will lead to pollution and potentially some harmful substances in the long term. So consumers are worried about waste. I said that before, but it really is hammered home when we look at our Motive AI platform and we look at, what does carbon dioxide-based plastic mean to consumers? And we can see that for them, plastic waste is a symbol of environmental neglect. So even their expectations around sustainability are somewhat more sophisticated. They worry that they're going to contribute to the plastic that we see that's in the landfill, or those pictures of the beautiful, pristine beach that's sullied by plastic. And we see consumers are noting things like plastic just ends up in landfills in the ocean. Our carbon footprint isn't just about what we emit, it's also what we leave behind. So again, they're thinking about how to create a more sustainable product that isn't around for thousands of years. And in part, this is because they do worry that decomposing plastic contributes to microplastic and is effectively a toxin for us. They are concerned that microplastics carry a metaphor of hidden harm, something that's harder to see, harder to understand, but they worry that microplastics end up in our food supply through our soil, as well as in our drinking water. So I think what's notable here is that consumers' concerns about carbon dioxide-based plastics are actually really similar to their concerns about traditional plastics. And for many consumers, a carbon dioxide-based plastic hasn't resolved these end-of-life concerns. Now, the biggest barrier to carbon dioxide-based plastics is that consumers worry they're going to be greenwashed. And from the consumer perspective, greenwashing is where we as corporations and industry make a number of claims that we can't necessarily deliver against. And there's a deep concern among some of these consumers that we use sustainability claims as a marketing tool without actually helping consumers to live a more sustainable lifestyle. So they're not totally convinced that this novel plastic is really all that much better for their environment or their health than traditional plastic. And they're worried that some of the benefits of this novel material are overhyped. They need assurances that we are addressing sustainability concerns, both from our input and our sourcing, all the way down to that end of life and waste management. Now, if we turn our attention to paper packaging, this is an example of a more mature product. It is not as novel. It is not in that experimental stage, but there is still innovation taking place when it comes to paper packaging. So our sizing here reflects the fact that there are more Americans engaged and interested in this culture. We look at consumers between the ages of 18 and 74. And if you'll recall, when it came to those carbon dioxide-based plastics, which is a tongue twister for me today, apparently, we saw 4 million people engaged. Well, here we're seeing over 56 million people are interested, engaged in the culture of paper packaging. We can see it's far more mature. It's in that early consensus. It's not in that experimental stage. Instead, we're anticipating that consensus and engagement in this culture will move into the mainstream in the next couple of years. So there are, is an opportunity here to appeal to a mainstream audience of consumers. And what's notable again is, perhaps not surprisingly, is that many consumers see paper packaging as an alternative and a better alternative to plastic, and particularly single-use plastic packaging. Part of this is driven by their commitment to creating a new moral standard of consumption that really does prioritize sustainability. But even though they're committed to a more sustainable lifestyle, many of these consumers continue to worry that paper packaging is messy and inconvenient. So again, what we see is that consumers are looking for convenience and they're looking for functionality when it comes to paper packaging. They need assurances that paper packaging is functional, which is probably not a surprise if you've ever, gone to the store and done some groceries in the rain and your paper bag has disintegrated on your walk home. Those functionality questions may be top of mind. Similarly, we see people are worried that if they throw in some cardboard packaged makeup or personal care in their purse, it might explode, it might cause a mess. But what's more interesting here and less obvious is that many consumers are worried that paper packaging is not as sanitary or hygienic. They are worried that paper packaging without any kind of plastic will lead to product contamination. And that's particularly true when it comes to personal care items, especially if they're stored in a humid bathroom. Excuse me. So here again, we see consumers are looking for functional benefits, but that's not all. They're also interested in those sustainability benefits. And like carbon dioxide-based plastics, they're worried about waste. They're worried about what happens at the end of that packaging's life stage. So here again, we have a few screenshots from our Motive AI tool, and we can see that not only are consumers worried about paper waste, in particular, they are worried about excess packaging. So again, they want to minimize their use of resources. They want to minimize how much paper they're using in their packaging. And it's also interesting that they are associating this with a moral and ecological concern. Furthermore, they are wondering, are there other ways we could address our paper waste? Would it be possible to have a compostable paper option? And that way we don't have to worry about what happens after we're done using it. And so again, we see consumers noting things like, I love the idea of these in compostable packaging or glass bottles. It's not just about food, it's about making a sustainable choice for the planet. And so it's also interesting to see that they're comparing plastic, paper, and glass and trying to figure out what best meets their needs. So again, we can see that consumers need a little bit of assurance, not only that they're going to get the functionality they expect, but they're also choosing something that's not just purported to be more sustainable, but is actually more sustainable. Yet again, we see one of the biggest barriers to the adoption of paper packaging is that consumers are worried about greenwashing. They are worried that they're going to give up on convenience without actually doing something that's more sustainable. And so they're worried about being greenwashed. And again, there's numerous examples of greenwashing out there. There's currently an athletic wear brand being sued because they are making claims that an environmental organization says they're not actually living up to. It's just to create an image of sustainability. And consumers are increasingly aware of this. They have more and more information at their fingertips. So based on these two examples, what are our key takeaways? Or what are our key lessons for today? Well, one, and this is what I started by saying, is that novel materials and technologies on their own are just not enough. People aren't necessarily going to be driven to them just because they're new. Furthermore, beyond their environmental implications, novel materials, novel technologies must also align with consumer expectations in order to thrive in the market, in order to have consumers adopt them. The other key thing here is that we see in all three of my examples is that functional, durable, and reliable solutions are key for consumers. They expect innovative products and materials to deliver a good user experience. They also expect sustainable products and services to meet their other requirements, to be convenient, to be reliable, to be trustworthy. And along those lines, consumers are getting smarter about sustainability. They're asking questions about things like energy utilization. How much energy is actually going into creating that paper packaging? They're asking questions about safety. And beyond that, they're wary of greenwashing, and they're seeking progress toward genuinely sustainable materials. And they're looking for trustworthy sources of information to help them navigate a changing world and new consumer options. I'll stop there, and I'm anxious to see if we have any questions for today.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. I do. There's a number of different things that have been messaged to me, and I'm excited to bring them to you. We are going to be taking more questions, so if anybody has anything and you want to add it to the box, you still have time to do so. But in the meantime, we do have a number of really, really good questions that I want to kind of like dig into. And once again, if we don't get to all the questions, please don't worry. You can reach out to the email that I shared earlier, or we'll reach out to you. Cheryl, one of the first things that somebody asked is going back to the beginning of the presentation, where they saw that we'd called out the interplay between themes and underlying symbolism. Can you talk a little bit about the relationship between those two things and how the audience can think about what we shared on that screen?
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, I can go back to one of those screens to provide some examples. So you're right, we do have themes. This is the key issue. What's going on from the consumer perspective? And as we looked at paper packaging, we could see the theme here is excess packaging is an environmental sin. Now, the underlying symbolism is really important because it helps us to understand why that's important, why this is a concern or an issue, why consumers even care about this. And you can see in this instance, symbolism is that wastefulness is a moral and ecological concern. Similarly, when it comes to that evolving preference for sustainable packaging, that's our what? What's happening from the consumer perspective? Well, the underlying symbolism, the why does it even matter to them, is that they are yearning for sustainability and environmental stewardship. They want that. And then, I know that it wasn't part of the question, but while I'm on the slide, I might as well continue on and note that our key insight is the so what? Why does it matter for industry and corporations? What should we do about this? And so, when it comes to that excess packaging example, we see the key insight is that consumers are frustrated with excessive packaging, and this highlights a desire for minimalism that respects resources. Right? So again, if we're a packaging company, or if we make a product that requires packaging, which is many of us, what this is telling us is there's an opportunity here to reduce the amount of packaging, to create minimal packaging as a way to address consumers' concerns about wastefulness and how that relates to environmentalism.
Awesome. That's great. I think even as you're describing that, it really just drives home this notion that some of the power by applying this anthropological kind of context is not limiting ourselves to what people are doing, but trying to extrapolate out to understand kind of why they're feeling a certain way, why they're making a choice that they are. And I love that example that they used in regards to the electric vehicle at the beginning, which kind of is a great segue into this next question, which is somebody was asking a little bit about the say-do gap. They said that when they talk to consumers, they tend to see a ton of willingness to make sustainable choices, but they don't always see the behavior match what consumers say when they get asked. So have you seen this in other research before? Can you talk a little bit about that say-do gap and kind of how sometimes you help clients overcome that kind of challenge?
That's a great question. Yeah, we absolutely have talked to many clients about the say-do gap. And sustainable alternatives. And of course, there's if we ask people, we're putting them on the spot. And it's pretty embarrassing to actually say, the environment isn't really my concern, because it's just not really an appropriate answer in some ways. So there is a say-do gap, in part because sometimes consumers don't feel comfortable revealing their true desires, beliefs, and motivations. But where I also think is interesting is in regard to nutrition, where we have clients come to us and note that consumers constantly say they want to eat healthier, they want whole grains, they want more nutritious food, but then they still buy chips, chocolate, and indulgent food, right? And so how do we reconcile the fact that they want these healthier things, but they're not necessarily buying them? And I think part of it is, again, how we get information. And I think the beauty of anthropology and observational analysis is that we're not relying on what consumers say explicitly. We're also looking at implicit meanings, and we're looking at the things that also go unsaid to help understand what really matters and what's really going on for consumers. The second thing is, I think there's a tension sometimes where we see a say-do gap. In many instances, I do believe consumers want to be more sustainable. They want to eat healthier, but they're often faced with a tension or a difficult choice. And we see this here where, I want to be more sustainable, but that paper packaging option isn't that appealing. I'm worried my food will go off faster and I'll end up wasting it. So there's opportunity there to help overcome that tension, to help make it easier for consumers to have their cake and eat it too, so to speak. And we do help clients as well using an anthropological approach to understand what goes beyond what they say, to understand what are those motivating factors, what are the cultural requirements, what are the expectations that we may be able to use to help overcome that say-do gap.
I think that the other thing too, Cheryl, is you and the team have a way of also looking at things culturally specific to a context in order to get to a deeper understanding of what somebody is experiencing in a unique moment in time. Because at the end of the day, I might make a sacrifice and I might tell you that I'm trying to avoid plastic packaging. And when I'm in the grocery store aisle and I'm looking at food, I may opt for paper packaging. But when I go down the shampoo aisle, all of a sudden my parameters shift and change. And the way that I associate the role of packaging is different in the context of food than it is in the context of personal care. And these are the types of things that I think are really powerful when you and the team kind of are able to really kind of look at these intersection points with what is important to the consumer at what phase that they're going through something, and how does it relate back to a business question or a business challenge that we need to understand in order to drive growth in the organization. So again, I think that's super, super helpful for anybody that's challenged with that. We got a couple more minutes and there's a couple more questions that I just want to get to. This is a biggie, but at the end of the day, I think it's a really important one. Somebody was just noticing that there seemed to be like a bit of an underlying theme, that there seems to be some doubt or a lack of trust that kind of was presenting itself a little bit in some of the data that you shared here today. So first and foremost, is that a fair assessment? You're nodding your head, so I think the answer is yes. But the second thing is that a layer that you could extrapolate up to and look at kind of those broader, higher order things like trust is the question.
Absolutely. We can look at trust very broadly, or as mentioned, Jason, look at trust in a particular context, right? So what does trust mean in relation to sustainability? What would drive trust for consumers as it relates to sustainability is absolutely something that that we could look at? What are the types of claims that are meaningful to consumers that they're more inclined to believe in the context of sustainability or in the context of other consumer products or goods? Absolutely. And it is a question that we get fairly often, actually. What drives trust? What leads to trust? Why aren't consumers more trusting in some of these spaces? And I think in this context, part of it goes back to this concern about greenwashing that we see come up time and time again.
That's great. I think there's one more question, but it's in regards to something that's a little bit more methodological. So I think that we're almost at the 30-minute mark. So I think we'll reach out and we will answer that question. Obviously, thank you to everybody for joining today. Really, really appreciate the engagement that we saw here. Cheryl, thank you very, very much. This is such a great presentation for anybody that is, kind of really trying to, kind of make inroads in understanding the role that consumers have in giving us clues in ways within which how we should be thinking about how we position our solutions and how we prioritize our solutions, so that not only do they match kind of operationally what we want to do, but that we're in essence basically kind of going towards where culture is going, following kind of the pathways that consumers are showing us in order to make that progression for the company easier as we're starting to kind of really benefit from the investments that we're making into sustainable solutions. And I think that was really, really powerful in how it came through today. So thank you very, very much. That is going to conclude our webinar. The slide presentation and recording of the webinar is going to get sent to all the attendees via email today. If you wouldn't mind, after the webinar, would you please look for a little prompt where you're going to be asked to complete a survey on the presentation. We'd really appreciate any feedback that you may have. It helps us as it informs kind of future webinars, whether or not that's through the topics that we look at or kind of just looking at ways to really add value for the people that give us their time and join these webinars with us. So take a moment and check out some of the upcoming webinars. There's some really fun stuff coming up. But with that, we're going to call it a day. Cheryl, once again, thank you. Thank you to everybody that joined, and I hope everyone has a wonderful day.